Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episodes, and at present around the world everybody actually busy with US politics and US presidential elections. Even today we saw the debate in between Donald Trump and Joe Biden's. So we have our analyst and we have a different party, different opinions, and we are trying to understand the US politics and global relationships from World Talent Economy Forums. And for this particular opinions, we have Mr. Gennady from Transhumanist Party, and he's the chairman of Transhumanist Party. I want to welcome Mr. Gennady.
Yes,
Hello.
thank you, Sharif. It's great to speak with you again.
Thank you, sir. Yes, today actually people has more focus on U.S. presidential debate in between Donald Trump and Mr. Joe Biden, and we people from around the world, we are actually really interested about U.S. presidential elections. And most important thing is that Transhumanist Party actually doing well. They are very organized. They are trying to making a very good collaborations globally, and most importantly you have better policy, you have better understanding about the futures, you believe in science and technology. So what do you want to say about that? What's your opinion in present situation?
Yes, indeed. And thank you, Sharif, for giving me this opportunity, because I really think the U.S. Transhumanist Party offers a vision for improvement to the current American political situation, which this situation sorely needs right now. Those of you who watched the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden would have observed largely a lot of incoherent name-calling, accusations, very little discussion of policy or substance. And these two individuals, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they do not represent the best of what America stands for. They represent a two-party system that unfortunately maintains a great deal of dominance over American politics to the detriment of substantive policy-oriented discourse and to the detriment of civility as well. There have been multiple debates among alternative party candidates in the United States prior to this time, and I even sponsored one of the debates. I moderated several of those debates. The key difference between those debates and the debate involving Donald Trump and Joe Biden is that the alternative party debates were always civil. They were always focused on the issues. And this was not the case with the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate. And another notable aspect was absent from that debate, and that is any focus on science and technology and how advances in medicine, in automation, in artificial intelligence, in space colonization, in a wide range of emerging technological areas could lift us out of the series of problems that humankind faces today and usher in a better future. Neither candidate really offered a hopeful vision for what the next few years might look like, and certainly not for what the next few decades would look like. So this is where the Transhumanist Party comes in. Our candidates for the 2020 US presidential election season are Charlie Cam, our presidential candidate, and Liz Parrish, our vice presidential candidate. And they are on the campaign trail offering a message of the future, essentially, hope for the future through the progress of science and technology. There's a heavy emphasis on life extension research and removing the barriers that currently exist within the US regulatory structure, particularly the Food and Drug Administration, to the maximal pace of advancement for that research. They also emphasize the importance of education. They emphasize the importance of building up people's scientific literacy and technical skills. They also emphasize inclusivity, the fact that good policies have to work for all Americans, and indeed, they have to work for all residents of the world, because we do live in a world where we face shared challenges and also have shared opportunities, but we need to exchange knowledge with one another. We need to foster the growth of our fellow human beings, no matter where they reside. And this is where the Transhumanist Party is optimally positioned, because we are the only political party in the United States that allows allied members, people from outside the United States, to join us and participate in our deliberations. Of course, they cannot vote in US elections, but they can contribute ideas, and these ideas make us stronger. And while the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have become parties of insults and incitement to hatred, the Transhumanist Party is very much the party of ideas. And we are open to cross-partisan collaboration with other political organizations. For instance, the Libertarian Party's vice presidential candidate, Jeremy Spike Cohen, had a great conversation with us during our Virtual Enlightenment Salon on September 13th, 2020. You can find a video recording of that Virtual Enlightenment Salon on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/G Stolyarov II. So that's the first letter of my first name, then my last name, and then 2 I's for the second. If you go to that YouTube channel, you will see we were able to have a very in-depth, substantive, policy-rich discussion with Spike Cohen. And we also discussed some opportunities for alternative political parties to collaborate in the United States to improve our chances of getting ballot access, and also to improve our recognition by various media sources, our ability to participate in debates going forward, our ability to get the word out to the general public. All of this is crucial because I believe the American people are justly tired of the Republicans and the Democrats, but many of them feel locked in. They feel like they have no genuine alternative, and they're wrong about that. That is an incorrect perception. But the two political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, have done such a tremendous marketing job in essentially deceiving the American public into thinking that they are the only choices. So I'm here to say there are other choices, and not just the U.S. Transhumanist Party. We have the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the American Solidarity Party, multiple independent candidates running in various states throughout the U.S. I would really encourage people who are monitoring the U.S. elections, particularly people who might be eligible to vote in the U.S. elections, to vote their conscience, to do their research on the candidates and see which candidates are most closely aligned to their own personal views. Because I would say a truly wasted vote is a vote for something that you do not believe in. So instead of voting for whom you might think will win or voting against some perceived greater evil, vote for the candidate who most closely aligns to your beliefs, your values, the kinds of policies you want to see implemented.
Mhm. Thank you, sir. Basically, you are talking about the better policy, better science and technology, better idea, and how actually modern political party should play in this in between their community. This is very interesting. Besides that, my question is that how actually you get support from American local communities, like from the youth community, especially intellectual community, how they're working with you and how they actually help transhumanist concept, because this is actually modern demands. Political parties should be like transhumanist party. They have to think in that way. But year and year, actually young and talent people, they are not right now are not interested about political party. They thinks that that if I engage with politics, this is not for me, and there are many negative things. But how actually transhumanist party attract this young talent pool as well as this intellectual community, those who can help you to build a better policy, better idea, and better science and technology?
Yes, indeed. And this is an important set of questions because young people are underrepresented in American politics. If you look at voter turnout statistics, the predominant share of voters in the United States would be older. So people, especially 45 and older, are much more likely to go out and vote than younger people, because a lot of younger people feel disillusioned. They feel like their vote won't count because of the two-party system, because they don't actually see many voices representing them in American politics. And in the Transhumanist Party, we do strive to change that. We do that in several ways. First of all, we're very open to communicating with students at all levels. So if a student reaches out to me as the chairman and has questions about transhumanism, about life extension, about the philosophy of our movement, about any of a set of emerging technologies, I will be happy to take the time to answer those questions or refer that student to one of our many experts in these areas. We have an extraordinary talent pool of individuals in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and those students will get the attention they deserve. They will get their questions answered. I've assisted students with their research projects. I've given interviews to anyone from middle school students to graduate researchers. And also, if they invite our members, our officers to their events, we've spoken at colleges, we've spoken at meetups, and we have a robust social media presence. We have various Facebook groups, Facebook pages, a Twitter account, an Instagram account. We have our virtual enlightenment salons on YouTube. So we're quite reachable to young, tech-savvy individuals. I also have a book, a children's book called Death is Wrong. And this book is aimed primarily at children ages 8 and older, though many precocious younger children would be able to access the ideas in it as well. I think I would have really loved the book when I was 4 and 5 years old, because at that time I was really grappling with the injustice of death, and I refused to accept the common rationalizations for it, and this book would have really helped me. So I think it is very important to involve young people as early as possible in discussions about how to improve the world through science, through technology, through better policy. And we do implement a range of approaches for that purpose. Now, we could always do more. I think greater outreach is what is needed in order to spread awareness of transhumanism as an alternative to this contemporary toxic political and cultural paradigm. If more people understand that transhumanism seeks to bring about a new era where, based on science, technology, and rationality, we will overcome these problems, then I think even more young people will be inspired. And you asked a question about outreach to intellectual communities. This is what our virtual enlightenment salons are about. So every week on Sunday, typically at 1 p.m. Pacific time, though we have had the occasion to reschedule it to a different time of day sometimes, we will invite one or several experts in a variety of disciplines. We've had researchers in artificial intelligence, we've had longevity researchers, we've had political figures in our virtual enlightenment salons, we've had neuroscientists, and every single week we bring a very in-depth perspective from some of these experts to the general public. These are free to attend, and they're modeled after the 18th century Enlightenment salons. Of course, the premise of the 18th century Enlightenment salons in many European countries was that learned individuals would gather in a hall, either in a great house, a library, maybe a public structure, and they would discuss ideas. They would discuss ideas from various disciplines and how those ideas interact, because ultimately we all inhabit one reality, and each discipline studies an aspect of that reality, but it's related to other aspects. It's related to other disciplines. So it's not sufficient to just study those aspects in isolation. It's important to bring them together. So science and technology, they relate to society, they relate to the economy, they relate to politics, all of the issues you also discuss at the World Talent Economy Forum. So we think it's crucial to bridge these areas and invite people from different perspectives, different disciplines to communicate with one another. And I believe the U.S. Transhumanist Party has been extremely successful in doing so. Our virtual enlightenment salons commenced in early May of this year during the pandemic, because we were unable to hold these physical gatherings. But because of technology, we're able to bridge the gaps of distance much more effectively. And the level of our intellectual activity, the kind of discourse we're able to offer on a regular basis, has just improved so dramatically that I'm quite heartened to see that.
Thank you. This is actually excellent idea that how you working and how you contributing for politics. And always I say that politics should be modern. Like everything's like we are developing science, we are developing technology, we are developing educations. But if we do not have better policy and politicians, we cannot get a very good results. We cannot get a very good like solution for that. I think there is a question from audience. I want to take his questions. Araf Mehraz, his question is that nice to see you again, Mr. Gennady. Will voter suppression play a role in the outcome of the 2020 presidential race?
Yes,
Yes.
that's an important question to address. I think voter suppression in the United States occurs on many levels legally. So one level at which it occurs is through very stringent ballot access requirements. In many states, one has to get several thousand or sometimes even tens or hundreds of thousands of petition signatures by hand in order for a candidate to qualify for the ballot. And one often only has a few months to do so. So the effect that that provides is, while ballot access is guaranteed to the Republican and Democratic parties, the minor party candidates, the alternative party candidates, need to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources getting this ballot access. And even then, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is likely to challenge that ballot access in court in certain jurisdictions. So by the time the election comes around, perhaps the petitions had entirely valid signatures, but there would be this court challenge pending. And in the meantime, that candidate doesn't get included on the ballot. This has happened, for instance, to the Green Party in the state of Nevada. And by the time that candidate actually wins and withstands the challenge, so the signatures were legitimate, so the candidate may be included on the ballot, the election is over. So this is one tactic of voter suppression. Another tactic of voter suppression is through essentially a system of media blackouts of alternative party candidates. For instance, if there's a large event like the open debate in Chicago on March 4th, 2020, that was hosted by the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, where 18 candidates from 8 different political parties took part. Very few media outlets showed up to cover the debate. All the coverage was done through online streaming or a few alternative publications that created articles about the debate, but the mainstream media refused to cover this event, even though it was an event among highly respected, highly prominent political figures in the US who all agreed to do this. And then another tactic of voter suppression is done through an organization called the Commission on Presidential Debates. The Commission on Presidential Debates is actually controlled by the Republican and Democratic parties. Officially, the members who sit on the commission are representatives of those two parties, and they set up very unreasonable thresholds for the inclusion of any other candidates in the debates. And the reason why they do this is because in the 1990s, alternative candidates like Ross Perot, for example, who ran on the Reform Party ticket, were able to get into the mainstream presidential debates and, in the eyes of many people, outperform the Republican and Democratic candidates. So the Republican Party and the Democratic Party decided to set the threshold for inclusion so high that Ross Perot would not have been able to make it into the debates during any time during this millennium. So now it's much more difficult than in the 1990s for any candidate other than a Republican or a Democrat to get into the debate. And then even with write-in candidates, sometimes the states will not allow write-in candidates. 9 states out of 50 do not allow them. And if the states do allow them, they might not count the votes, so they might not publish the totals. So there are so many barriers, but at the same time, I think it's really important for people to vote for alternative candidates because that is still a freedom they technically have under the US Constitution and under the laws of various states. And of course, it's their basic human right as well to vote for the candidate who is closest to their views, because ultimately that's a signal however that signal is conveyed, whether it's through official totals or whether it's through people themselves broadcasting that they voted for a particular candidate. The message is conveyed to the two-party system's representatives that the people are not satisfied with the options before them. And at the very least that the incumbent politicians could do is change some of their approaches to policies to better reflect the views of those dissatisfied demographics, so that the next time a candidate is elected, that person might actually select from some of those ideas and implement them. Now, voter suppression, it's also interesting that there's a debate happening around mail-in ballots right now in the United States. And there are some people who are strongly opposed to mail-in ballots, even though without mail-in ballots, there would be great physical risk for people to appear in polling places in large crowds and potentially catch COVID-19 or catch another infectious disease. I do not have any problem with mail-in ballots. I do not have any problem with electronic voting as long as it's secure. And there are various blockchain-based mechanisms that are capable of producing secure elections. In the United States Transhumanist Party, we don't even need to resort to blockchain-based elections because we have other security protocols, but we have a lot of experience running fully secure, fully accurate electronic votes. So there may be attempts to challenge the accuracy of certain genuine votes that are cast during this election. And whatever the motivations for those challenges, I would consider them to be tactics of voter suppression, because actual attempted duplicative voting in the United States is very rare. You could probably count the instances on both hands, or maybe there are a few more than that, a few tens of instances in the entire country. However, I think a lot of the fear surrounding that is misplaced. I think the greater problem will be what happens if people are afraid to vote because they don't feel like it's safe for them to vote. So this is a very difficult election. I have to say that up front. Because of all the barriers I mentioned, if somebody just wants to exercise their basic human right to support a particular candidate, they have to go through the barriers for ballot access, the barriers of awareness that the media and the Commission on Presidential Debates put forward. So they have to educate themselves. They have to put in a lot more effort than the typical American who supports the Democrats or the Republicans would exert. And then it might not even be safe for them to vote if they choose to do so. So that's really a shame, but I would encourage people to still do their due diligence, study all the available options, and vote using the safest way that is available, because that way at least you have some sort of voice and you don't have to support the depredations of the American political system.
Thank you. Thank you. This is actually excellent idea, and then we get a better understanding about the American politics and other things. Beside that, I want to know, even today, actually, your presidential candidate and vice presidential candidate, Charlie and Liz, they have planned to join, but I know they are very busy in that situations. That is the issue, that they cannot join. But do you want to share some message on behalf of them, or anything, because you are the chairman for this party?
Yes, indeed. And I asked Charlie Cam to provide a message for our audience today with regard to some of his recent thoughts about the campaign. And here's what Charlie says. He says, "I feel that I'm extremely fortunate, and so is the U.S. Transhumanist Party and really everyone else, that I have an amazingly intellectually gifted running mate in Liz Parrish to stand in my place sometimes when I campaign and do a remarkably outstanding job of representing our transhumanist values and political platform. And of course, I'm also grateful for you," that is, he's speaking to me as the chairman of the Transhumanist Party, "and to our great team of dedicated officers." So this is a heartening message from Charlie because it speaks to the team effort that we put forward in making this campaign possible, in spreading awareness of transhumanism in a positive way, in a way that stimulates thinking and discussion. And of course, Liz Parrish is a tremendously articulate individual. You've interviewed her before. Hopefully you will have the opportunity to interview her again. And also I would encourage people to watch our virtual Enlightenment Salon of September 6th, 2020, where Liz was one of the guests of honor. We also have a clip on my YouTube channel of some of her remarks about how longevity research and the pursuit of longevity could become more popular, more accepted by the general public. So I would like to echo Charlie's sentiments, and hopefully everyone else found his message inspiring as well.
Thank you, sir. I want to know, like example, let's say your president and vice presidential candidate, they are highly educated and they have many more dynamics and they can contribute for their nations. So like example, when actually Transhumanist Party select president and vice president candidate and young people like this, what's the process and how you actually select them? What's the criteria? And most important thing is that as they are now their candidate, how American people can vote them.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So there are many questions there. I will take them one at a time. So this campaign cycle was a bit unusual in 2020 because we had a primary election in 2019 using the ranked choice method. But Charlie Cam originally was not our presidential candidate. He was the vice presidential candidate. And then he became the presidential candidate in June of 2020. And he selected Liz Parrish as his running mate in August of 2020. So the presidential nominee, the endorsed candidate of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, gets to select his or her running mate. And that will continue going forward. In terms of the criteria are evolving, and I think going forward they're going to be a bit more extensive than they've been in the past. They're going to emphasize, of course, presence within the transhumanist community. So we want candidates who are aware of what transhumanism is, what transhumanists stand for, who are familiar with the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform, and who also have some history in the movement. People like Charlie, for example, have been in the transhumanist movement for a long time. Charlie put on the Transvision 2007 conference, which was instrumental in the history of our movement in that it brought together so many thinkers, people like Ray Kurzweil, Aubrey de Grey, Peter Diamandis, and also it had William Shatner as one of the guests of honor. So it was an opportunity for figures from the fields of science, business, culture, entertainment, to get together and build bridges, create new collaborations from which a lot of the subsequent accomplishments within the transhumanist community stem. So we are extremely fortunate to have Charlie, and of course Liz Parrish too has an extensive history in the transhumanist and life extension community. She's well known as being the first patient in 2015 to receive a combination gene therapy for treating the diseases of aging. So Liz Parrish actually was able to get some improvement in various biomarkers from that experimental gene therapy that she received, the combination gene therapy, but she also took on a lot of risk. And she had to do it personally because the laws of the various jurisdictions involved would not have allowed her to administer that treatment to somebody else. So she knowingly decided at great risk to herself to try out these treatments and see if they would help her. And the experiment seems to have been successful based on what we know, of course. And she has since done a lot of great work in terms of advocacy for access to medical treatments, for longevity research with her company, BioViva. She's working to make access to gene therapies available to more people through the various partner entities that BioViva collaborates with. So this is, I think, an example of a person who is also quite committed to making these ideals a reality. So that's what we hope to see in our future candidates. I want to emphasize for the US Transhumanist Party, because we recognize the formidable barriers in the American electoral process, we know that our candidates are not going to be the next president or vice president of the United States, unfortunately, but they can be great ambassadors for the vision for a brighter future. And as ambassadors, they can be a kind of light in the dark scene. And then I want to answer the other question about how do we get them to actually make headway in the American political system? What can people do to support them? So I mentioned the difficulty of getting candidates on the ballot, but some states have the possibility of write-in access for candidates. So there are 41 states and then the District of Columbia that do allow you to write in a candidate. And if you live in one of the states where there's a write-in option, please write in Charlie Cam for president. There are a few states that will accept any write-in candidate, and those include Iowa, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, Wyoming, Alabama, and New Jersey. So if you live in those states, you may comfortably feel free to write in Charlie Cam. Now, I would suggest that you contact the US Transhumanist Party as well and let us know that you wrote in Charlie Cam. Because if you let us know, we will have our own internal tally of people who voted for our candidates. And we're not going to publish any personal identifying information about you, but we will let people know how many people in total we believe to have voted for Charlie Cam. And that, again, will serve the purpose of sending that signal to the rest of the American political system that there are a decent number of people who care about the technological future and the values that the Transhumanist Party espouses. And then there are some states which have certain additional criteria for write-in candidates, like registration deadlines, or sometimes a candidate has to pay a fee, but you may still write in candidates in those states. And what I would suggest that you do for those states is definitely email us at US Transhumanist Party altogether at protonmail.com. And that way, we will know that you voted for the write-in candidate. The state may not actually count the vote, depending on what the officials there are inclined to do. Sometimes states allow write-in candidates, but they don't publish the totals, so that dampens the signal, and we want to intensify that signal. So states like that include Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, the District of Columbia, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia. And there are some other states as well that allow this, but in those states, they prohibit you from taking pictures of your ballot, which I think is a violation of free speech. People should be able to photograph their own ballots if they so choose. But we do want to follow the law. So in those states, if you vote, if you write in Charlie Cam, please tell us that you did, but don't send us pictures of your ballot. Those states are Alaska, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kansas, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. And if you go back and listen to the recording of this, I know I went through this very quickly, figure out if I named any of your states, and if so, in what category. And if you receive a write-in option on your ballot, if there's a blank that you can fill in, please write in Charlie Cam, because we need to send this signal to the American political establishment that people care about these issues.
Thank you, sir. Beside that, I want to know, there are more audience response. I'm going to take their questions. I want to know, even we want to know that today there is a presidential debate in between Mr. Donald Trump and Mr. Biden, Joe Biden. So can you please give some sort of political explanations, if you want to give, like on behalf of your party. Yes.
Yes. So the tone of that presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was, simply put, atrocious. The extent of interruptions, of name calling, of ad hominem attacks was inexcusable for any civilized political discourse. Of course, people are going to disagree about ideas. Of course, people are going to disagree about what is the desirable future of our country. But to lower oneself to that level of behavior, I wouldn't even call it childish, because children are better behaved than Donald Trump and Joe Biden were. And certainly children are better motivated even when they do misbehave. But that debate was essentially each side trying to score political points by denigrating the other side. So both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are seeking to turn voters off of their opponents. Each side wants American voters to see the other side as such a great evil, or so incompetent, or so terrible, that the voters will go ahead and vote for what they believe to be an imperfect option, but at least better than the other side. The issue is about half the country thinks that Joe Biden is worse than Donald Trump. About half the country thinks that Donald Trump is worse than Joe Biden. And these two sides keep trying to really engage in character assassination and tarnish the reputation of the other side in order to shift essentially what they consider to be swing voters. And not just swing voters, but swing voters in a few states. Because in the United States, there's the Electoral College. And the Electoral College technically can elect a president that the popular vote did not elect. And this happened several times in American history. The last time it happened was in 2016, when Donald Trump lost the popular vote, but he won the Electoral College because of the way that electors are allocated among states. It's a formula that considers a mix of how many representatives a state has and how many senators a state has. And each state has 2 senators, regardless of the population. So that means some of the less populous states are going to be more represented in the Electoral College. Moreover, in most states, if a candidate wins the popular vote in that state, the electors in that state are pledged to all vote for that candidate. So it's not proportional at all. If a candidate wins 51% of the popular vote, that candidate wins 100% of the electors, unless the electors are courageous enough to be what are called faithless electors. Technically, under the US Constitution, they're allowed to vote for whomever they want, but very few electors actually choose to do that. So we have situations where a lot of the states can be fairly reliably predicted to vote for either the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate. For instance, a state like California is always going to vote for the Democratic candidate for the foreseeable future in terms of the majority of the popular vote. On the other hand, for instance, a state like Alabama or Mississippi is extremely likely to vote for the Republican candidate in terms of the majority of the popular vote. So we know which way the Electoral College votes of those states will go. But there are other states where the outcome is uncertain and it varies with each election. For instance, my state of Nevada is a swing state. Other swing states include Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida. Some have even said Texas might be a swing state in this election. So with those states, the major political parties devote the vast majority of their advertising and their in-person campaigning to the voters of those states. And unfortunately, they're just trying to convince a few voters who are on the proverbial fence to go one way or the other. I say it's a tremendous waste of resources, and it really shifts the discussion away from policy issues that would concern all Americans, no matter where they reside, because I think each side is trying to get enough people to be just a little bit more disgusted with the other side than with their side, and that's how they'll vote. And once one side wins the election, it's not likely to care about the actual opinions of those swing voters.
Thank you, sir. Actually, there are many audience questions. I want to take their questions step by step. Mohammad Shoel Rana, he asked you questions. Mr. Gennady, how will people who lost their homes in the recent wildfire, uh, okay, this could have an impact on the election? So what's your opinion on that particular points? There are more question. I want to move step by step. Yeah,
Yes. So he's referring to the wildfires in California and other
exactly.
western states where,
Mhm.
yes, there has been a lot of property damage, even some death, and a lot of displacement of people who had to evacuate during the wildfires. Some of the wildfires are still ongoing. So technically, losing your home doesn't prevent you from voting if you're registered to vote in that district. The question is, how might it affect what choices people make? I would say a lot of blame can be placed on both political parties for the conditions that gave rise to those wildfires. So, on the one hand, the state of California is particularly prone to those wildfires because there haven't been good efforts to clean up the dead brush in the forests, and a lot of the land is owned by the federal government or owned by the state of California, and there's just very poor maintenance there. On the other hand, there are contributions of climate change as well to the wildfires because there are many more days of extreme heat and extreme drought in that area. And so that leads to very flammable conditions. In fact, I live in Nevada, which is across the border from California, and we do not get nearly as many wildfires. We do have superior land management in Nevada, but we get a lot of the smoke from the wildfires carried over by the winds. And I know from my personal experience, prior to 2013, there was very little smoke blown over from the California wildfires. In 2013, and then every year thereafter, there was considerable wildfire smoke blown over from the California wildfires. So something changed, something significant and qualitative changed about that situation. So climate change plays a role. And it will depend also, I think, on the voters' perceptions of which candidates are best suited to handle climate change. I think neither party, the Republicans nor the Democrats, really offer good solutions to those issues. The Transhumanist Party does have some extensive technologically based solutions that we have proposed to implement. But the way people vote, I think, will depend on whom they're frustrated with the most. And that will vary a lot based on personal interpretation. And this is one other aspect of the American political scene that I think people need to be aware of and wary of. Anytime there's a crisis or a tragedy, there are many different interpretations surrounding that, many different versions of events that are spread throughout social media. And some of them have more basis in fact than others. But a lot of cynical political strategists in the United States are depending on people essentially accepting their particular versions of events that are designed to bring about certain preconceived outcomes. Some people are going to say, oh, the wildfires are the result of the Republican Party not taking decisive enough action on climate change. On the other hand, the Republican Party is going to say, well, the wildfires are the result of the Democrats in California mismanaging the lands. But I think all of those characterizations are quite simplistic. There are many actions that can be taken to reduce wildfire risk that I think all reasonable people would agree on. And to play the blame game rather than doing the work that it takes to actually improve the situation. That's the problem in American politics. And I would rather that people not lose their homes at all. I would rather that they not have anyone to blame because their livelihoods are intact. But we see the dysfunction in the American political system. And the tragedy of these wildfires and the people displaced by them is one illustration of what that dysfunction can lead to.
Thank you, sir. There are more questions from audience. Hosne Ara Firdos, he asked you questions. Mr. Gennady, is there any possibility to access do other countries have to the election systems like recently we observed, let's say, at present president, he always said that this country will get in, that country will get in to the American politics. I think people has interest on that point. Is it legal? Is it logical? What do you think?
Well, of course, people who aren't citizens of the United States would not be able to vote in American elections. Nothing prohibits them from having an opinion about American elections. And I think American elections have global consequences. That's absolutely a fact. And I think this is a fact that needs to be recognized by voters in the United States and politicians in the United States. When you vote for a candidate, are you voting for somebody who is going to have a reasonable foreign policy that's also going to respect the rights and aspirations of people outside the United States? So I think that foreign policy should be one of peace. It should be one of encouraging commerce and exchange of ideas. And it should be one that seeks to uplift everybody in the world through the sharing of knowledge, through technological progress that should not be based on national boundaries. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of xenophobia from both the Republican parties and the Democratic parties, who tend to demonize different groups of foreigners, of people outside the United States, sometimes of immigrants into the United States. And that is a tragedy. But I've seen that kind of rhetoric on the part of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And I hope that American voters decisively reject that. And the way to reject that is in one's day-to-day interactions, seek out perspectives from other countries. Do what the World Talent Economy Forum does and hold conversations with people from all over the world in order to understand what they think, what they value, not base it on stereotypes, because I think in the United States, there's a lot of stereotypical thinking where people attribute ideas or attribute motives to people of other nationalities, other ethnic groups, and they say, oh, all people of this group think that way. No, absolutely not. All people are individuals. And that's another important concept. Treat all people as individuals, regardless of national boundaries, because if we all relate to one another as individual human beings, we'll find a lot of diversity, we'll find a lot of wealth of insight, and we'll find ways to collaborate. We'll find ways to build this shared future while recognizing and respecting our differences as well.
Thank you, sir. There are more audience response. Humaira Tanzila, she said, "Hello, sir. Thank you for joining this session. It is a valuable discussion. The audience are able to know many important things about elections." I think audience really interest about the discussions and about the American politics, and especially how you actually develop your concept, your political concept. This is very important for World Talent Economy Forum. So there is a question from Abiaz Mustain. He said, Mr. Kennedy, is there any issue regarding ensuring the safety of voters' online privacy in this election? What do you think, as you are representing a dynamic political party?
Yes. So I will speak to two facets of this question. One is, in the current system, what are the safeguards to privacy? And then in a future where online voting is actually implemented, what would be the safeguards to privacy? So in the current system, it's actually surprisingly easy to get information about who is a registered voter and even whether they voted in a given election. Of course, we have the secret ballot in the United States. So I don't know of any way to get information as to how somebody voted. At least I hope not. But every major political party has access to who are the registered voters in a given area and what elections they voted in. And they use that to target advertising largely. So they will send you mailers if they think you're likely to vote. especially if you're in a swing state such as Nevada, for example. They don't know how you voted. Again, I hope they don't know how you voted. But sometimes they will make misleading statements. For instance, I know of a case where the Nevada Republican Party in this election season sent mailers to certain voters who were registered to vote, but the mailers said, our information suggests that you are not registered to vote. Fill out this form to register to vote. And probably if they fill out the form, nothing bad will happen to them. But it creates confusion. It leads people to think, oh, I thought I was registered to vote, but was I really? So there can be a kind of propaganda effect and a misinformation effect that is troubling. But I don't think that kind of access can in itself pose significant safety threats to individuals, because these political parties, they are insidious in their own ways, but they're not likely to try to steal people's financial information, for example. There are risks of identity theft that arise from other actors. So whenever you have a public database of names and addresses and other personally identifying information, especially if it's coupled with birth dates or any government-issued identification numbers, a lot of bad actors can inflict a lot of damage. So this is where online voting can actually be more secure, because blockchain can function by anonymizing transactions to those who see the public ledger. So a blockchain is essentially a public ledger of all of the actions and transactions taken for a particular process. Historically, they've often been used for cryptocurrencies and essentially registering who transferred what amounts of the cryptocurrency to whom. But of course, blockchains can be used for other purposes, smart contracts, who took what actions with regard to the matter subject to the contract, and how does the contract respond to that. Or, for instance, information in voter registration databases. So you could have a blockchain where every voter's information is contained, but it's encrypted and it's anonymized, so that what the public sees, what other observers of the votes see, is just that a legitimate voter cast his or her ballot, but they don't see that Joe Smith cast his ballot. And that's more security than exists under the current system. So from the standpoint of private parties having access to lists of names and addresses, a blockchain could actually provide a barrier against that, which would mean more anonymity for individuals who are not comfortable with having that information disclosed, and maybe they won't get targeted political advertising as well. Though, of course, advertisers will find ways. They'll find ways to advertise to you based on your social media activities or based on other places where you might have shared some information. So it's very difficult to get away from. The key, I think, these days is not so much to make sure you don't get marketed to, because that's almost impossible to protect yourself against. The key is to protect yourself against people who would impersonate you, who would steal your financial information, who would try to access your bank accounts, who would try to commit some sort of crime in your name or some sort of crime against you. Those are the real problems. But I think with blockchains, with other IT security types of technologies, they can be overcome better in an online setting as contrasted with an in-person setting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. There is a more audience questions. I just want to take one. Muhammad Shahinul Islam, he asked you a question, Mr. Gennady, what if President Donald Trump refused to accept the election result?
So Donald Trump has a history of making intentionally provocative and inflammatory statements because he had been a reality TV show star, and he's essentially tried to be a reality TV president. But I would say he is more of essentially a showman than he is an aspiring dictator. In my evaluation, he didn't actually intend to win the 2016 presidential election. He intended to use it to reinvigorate his brand because his brand was fading. It was kind of seen as a relic of a bygone era. But when he was running for president, he thought that would attract more interest to his businesses, to his products, to his reputation. But he won. To his own surprise. And now, of course, he fears that if he loses this election, he will be subject to a lot of prosecution afterward, a lot of scrutiny. So he definitely doesn't want to lose. Now that he's president, he wants to stay president. But what he's saying about possibly not accepting the results of the election. First of all, it's very ambiguous. It's not clear what he would actually do or what he would have the power to do. We do have a three-branch system, a legislative branch, a judicial branch, and an executive branch. And in each of those branches, there are entities that are capable of making sure that the laws are enforced. So, for instance, if there's a valid election, it's recognized by the U.S. Congress, and also there are many Supreme Court precedents regarding U.S. elections. And a sitting president just doesn't agree with the results. Well, the rest of the government will carry out the procedure to inaugurate the new president. And generally speaking, the civil service in the United States, as well as the U.S. military, do not function on the basis of personal loyalty to a current office holder, at least anyone other than the direct appointees of that office holder. And those tend to rotate out when a new president comes into power. So essentially, Donald Trump and a few handful of cabinet members might disagree with the election outcome. But the rest of the government would just proceed. If Joe Biden wins, I believe Joe Biden will be inaugurated in January of 2021, if he does win, unless there is a legitimate dispute in the courts. If there's a court challenge, and the only time this happened was in the year 2000, where there was a challenge because there needed to be a recount in the state of Florida, and there were questions about how that recount was conducted. But ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of George W. Bush, and he was inaugurated on time, actually, because there are a little more than 2 months from the election day to the date of the presidential inauguration. So this just shows that the American political system is not an authoritarian system at this time. Now, could it, over the course of decades, over the course of generations, become an authoritarian system? Yes, that's a vulnerability in any political system. It happened in ancient Rome, for example, over the course of centuries, where the Republic became increasingly authoritarian and increasingly mired in chaos until Octavian Augustus essentially decided to officially become the Emperor of Rome. And then, of course, it took quite a few centuries for that system to degenerate and collapse as well. So could that happen over the long term? Yes, but I don't think we're there yet. And we've seen, as examples, a lot of resistance to Donald Trump in Congress. We've had a lot of resistance to Donald Trump's policy proposals and executive orders in the courts. Of course, the media are generally not favorable to Donald Trump. And if it came to a situation where Donald Trump asked the civil service and the military to enforce his will, even if he clearly lost the election, I don't think they would comply. So the only way this could drag out past the scheduled inauguration day in January 2021 is if there is a real, serious, legitimate dispute about who got the most votes in those crucial swing states. And it would be in just a few swing states that the outcome of this election will be determined. So that's my assessment. I'm not too worried about that. I think the Democrats are probably inflating the danger of that happening. If it's a danger over the longer term because of a general trajectory toward a more authoritarian presidency.
Mhm. I want to focus on two more important things. Can I extend these sessions because of audience has huge response? They want to know more. I think still they have questions to you. So specifically, if you allow me, then I can continue a few more minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. At present situations, in COVID-19, there are a lot of economical challenges. Even most important thing is vaccine. Even example, vaccine and politics, everything is moving together. And as your party is based on science and technology, what you think what should be the future of this vaccine diplomacy, and how we should focus on these things? This is number one. And number two, I do want to focus on this maybe next challenge come as a global warming and this kind of things. So how actually these political parties, they are supporting this green technology, they're supporting this solar energy and different kind of things we should take as initiative. What your thoughts?
Yes, and these are extremely important questions. With regard to the vaccine, what is happening in the United States today is an example of why it's important not to politicize science. Rather, it's important to scientize politics, because we should all want the COVID-19 pandemic to be overcome as soon as possible. And the emergence of a vaccine is crucial for that purpose. We're not going to get herd immunity without massive deaths unless there's a vaccine. So what are the obstacles to the emergence of a vaccine? There's a very cumbersome drug approval process in the United States. And while there are some pathways for emergency authorization, even those pathways are fairly slow. Historically, the fastest vaccine that was developed up to this point was developed in 4 years. So if a COVID-19 vaccine takes less time than that, it will already be a world record. And to its credit, the Trump administration has loosened a lot of the time frames. But I think it's essential, once a vaccine candidate shows to be reasonably safe in clinical trials, patients should be allowed to try it and receive doses, even if phase 3 trials for efficacy have not yet been conducted. Because whether or not it's efficacious over a certain threshold, if the vaccine candidate is reasonably known to be safe, either through clinical trials or by the nature of its design. Sometimes by the way you create a vaccine, you know that it can only do a certain amount of damage, or might not even have the potential to do damage at all. Then of course it's better than not having anything. And there is a bias in regulatory agencies, such as the US Food and Drug Administration, toward these protracted approval processes, because the officials in charge of the approvals worry about the adverse consequences to them if they approve a drug that has deleterious side effects. Because if you think about it, if they approve a drug and some patients have negative side effects, they can point to the approval and say, oh, this was reckless, this was irresponsible. But if they don't approve the drug or the vaccine and people die from the disease, then there won't be specific blame assigned to those officials. People will just say, oh, this is a terrible disease, or diseases happen, death happens. It happens quite often to many people. So the unfortunate outgrowth of this is that sometimes the costs and risks of inaction can be massive. As we're seeing with COVID-19, over 1 million people have died in the world. Over 200,000 people have died in the United States. And some people still think that it would be wise to slow down vaccine research. And I think a lot of people say that because of the politicization of every aspect of this pandemic. And this is the unfortunate reality. If Donald Trump is able to get a vaccine out to the general public prior to the election, that is going to help his chances of winning re-election. And Joe Biden and the Democrats do not want that. So they want to characterize this push for a vaccine as irresponsible. However, to be objective, it's not irresponsible. Any attempt to save lives, any attempt to get us out of this pandemic through a scientific approach is laudable. And for me, the most important step that needs to be taken is overcoming this disease. That's a lot more important than who wins this election. That's a lot more important than partisan politics or name calling. We, as a country and as a world, need to care about overcoming COVID-19 more than about scoring political points. So whoever develops this vaccine, whatever company in whatever country, in Russia, for example, the Russian government did authorize a vaccine to be distributed. It's based on an adenovirus, so you can't get COVID-19 from it. The most you can get from it as a side effect is a mild infection. And they did it while phase 3 trials are still ongoing. I think that's the correct approach, and more vaccine candidates should be made available because different vaccine candidates could work well with different populations. So that's my thought on the COVID-19 vaccine. I think it's important to get many vaccine candidates out to the general public as long as they're reasonably shown to be safe as soon as possible. With regard to climate change, of course, that is a longer term challenge. It is a challenge that has existed for several decades now, but it's beginning to manifest in some highly adverse effects like the wildfires that we discussed, also greater frequency of hurricanes and other storms, generally greater weather extremes. Different parts of the world are going to be affected differently. So some parts of the world are going to see greater drought. Other parts of the world are going to see greater precipitation. The key is we humans, through science and technology, need to regain control over the forces of nature. The prior generations of technology, unfortunately, they had these side effects of generating an excess of greenhouse gases, creating these unanticipated effects. Future generations of technology can be more targeted toward their specific purpose. They could have fewer side effects. Of course, it's very important to develop renewable, clean energy. Nuclear power is a key component of this, and I think those who are serious about solving climate change should support safe nuclear power. There are a lot of stereotypes about nuclear power, but those stereotypes are based on technologies from the 1970s as well as human error in managing those technologies. The fact is, a nuclear power plant built today based on current technologies and current safeguards, as well as emerging designs, for instance, for thorium-based power plants, would essentially be meltdown proof. And this can provide cheap, abundant energy that does not generate greenhouse gas emissions. Also, there needs to be more support for cheap, economical solar power. And entrepreneurs like Elon Musk are doing an excellent job in lowering the per unit cost of electricity generated through solar power. There are other alternatives as well. Hydroelectric power, I do believe more dams need to be constructed. Geothermal power, even wind power could play a role in this mix. But the key is one cannot solve the climate change crisis through relinquishment, which is unfortunately what some so-called deep green environmentalists would advocate. If you renounce technology, if you renounce growth and progress, you're going to go back to even worse environmental effects than exist today. Because if you think about societies which burn wood predominantly for fuel, or which burn dung for fuel, that results in a lot more pollution than societies that burn oil or natural gas for fuel. So we can't move backward, and we have to invest in new generations of technologies. There are other measures as well. For instance, I mentioned this problem of excess dead wood accumulated in the forests in California. This would also be a great way to improve employment if essentially teams of individuals are hired to go into the forests and clean up the dead brush and perhaps bring it out, and it could be used in various manufacturing applications as well. If you essentially make wood chips out of the dead brush, or use it in some sort of composite wood materials, that could help in other ways as well. But primarily you get the fuel out of the forests. You could have more effective technological monitoring of emerging fires, for instance, by installing more cameras in elevated places that could spot a fire earlier so that it could be suppressed earlier. You could use robots and drones for firefighting purposes to get into remote areas that would be dangerous for humans. And ultimately, also, it's important to cultivate 3D printing of meat, because a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions, they arise from cattle and other domesticated animals. And I think it would be excellent if humans could consume meat without having to kill animals. And so instead of having factory farms where these animals, as a byproduct, also generate greenhouse gases, we could have clean, healthy, 3D printed meat, which is biologically identical to the meat that is currently produced, but it doesn't have all of these adverse side effects. So that's another option. And also, I would also say technologies of health and longevity that lead to increases in lifespan are important, because they motivate people to think longer term. And if people think longer term, they will be more motivated to solve the climate change crisis as well as other crises.
Thank you, sir. I want to know more about, let's say, in COVID situation, many people lose their job.
Mhm.
Many business organizations cannot play properly. So in that situation, what's your political party's commitment, let's say, from your president and vice presidential candidate, and you are representing in one of the dynamic political parties, that how you can help your countries to create more job opportunity? And this is one of the burning issue right now.
Yes. So, first of all, we've seen that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a differential impact on jobs depending on the kinds of jobs that there are. So, people who are in occupations that require a lot of physical contact tend to be more vulnerable to this kind of displacement if public locations, places of business have to be closed. But people who are knowledge workers, for example, can work from anywhere. They can stay at home and they can produce. But of course, you have to have some sort of physical component to the economy in order to have physical goods produced, to have them moved around, to have them delivered to customers. So I would say encouraging more automation to take people out of close proximity with others and enable them to interact through robots, through avatars, through autonomous vehicle delivery systems would help, because people would still be needed. They would be needed behind the scenes to keep track of the technology, to maintain it, to direct it in terms of where it needs to go, what it needs to do. But the more automated a society is, the more technologically advanced it is, the more people can have these more physically distant roles, which are primarily knowledge-based, where they don't have to directly expose themselves. And those jobs are more secure against these kinds of disruptions. But also, we recognize in the U.S. Transhumanist Party that there needs to be some sort of cushion for people who are involuntarily displaced because of these kinds of phenomena, which is why we advocate for a universal basic income for all individuals, because that is the most efficient way to actually provide resources for people who lost their jobs and people who will need some time to retrain. And that will enable them to weather this pandemic without interruption. So in the United States, there was a kind of half-hearted attempt where many Americans got $1,200 stimulus checks if their income was below a certain level, but it was still very cumbersome and not easy to administer, because eligibility criteria were involved. And whenever eligibility criteria are involved, you have an elaborate bureaucratic apparatus that needs to make sure that the eligibility criteria are enforced. So a true universal basic income is unconditional. It's given to everyone, and the same amount is given to everyone because of the ease of administration, not because everyone necessarily will need that money, but because it's less costly to just give it to everyone than to spend a lot of time and effort figuring out who actually needs it. So if you have a true universal basic income, then people will have this guarantee and this expectation that if they're involuntarily displaced from their jobs, that will not be ruinous for them. They will have some floor, some basic standard of living that they will be able to maintain. And then they can retrain, they can still seek out jobs, they can essentially re-specialize for the technological and the economic realities that they find themselves in. So that's why we think basic income is crucial. At the same time, we believe that all societies should invest more in technological education. And this pandemic actually has opened certain doors because many schools, many universities were closed. So if people wanted to educate themselves, they have often had to educate themselves remotely. But often the technological interface of distance learning is more conducive to education, and it's more conducive to learning new skills in an environment that's focused on learning rather than focused on, let's say, the suboptimal behaviors of one's peer group. So if you're learning online, you're motivated to learn because that's essentially what you're there to do. And you don't have distractions that you would in a physical setting, like bullying or partying as examples. So this could be a net positive, but of course people have to be motivated to learn. So I would say my message to anyone who fears the risk of job loss, and it's a very legitimate fear, by the way, is to always be open to learning, always be motivated to learn new skills, new ideas, because the economy of the future is dynamic and it's going to be heavily reliant on technology. And you want to be in a position where if you have to make a shift, you would have the ability to make that shift.
Thank you, sir. Just a few idea I'm just taking from audience. I think Noor Fazrin, she said, hello everyone, greetings from Malaysia. And she want to know involvement of blockchain technology in voting system.
Yeah.
Second thing, Araf Mehraz, he want to know from you about debate, how important it is for politics. And Muhammad Shohel Rana, he said that how you want to convince your voters. So these are the 3 points. If you come, then we go for the concluding remarks.
Yeah. So with regard to blockchain-based voting, I'm not aware of implementations in the United States yet. I know that Estonia has done a great job in implementing a blockchain-based voting system. So I would point to Estonia as a model for how it could be done. And hopefully within this decade, we'll have some proofs of concept in the US as well. Now, with regard to debate and the importance of debate, I think rational civil debate that's focused on substance and focused on politics is very important for engaging with the general public and getting the public to be aware of the differences that exist and the controversies that exist. But of course, debate, as you well know, is an art. And you can be a skilled debater or a not so skilled debater. And of course, with any good debate, there are rules and norms that are observed. So if there are prescribed timeframes, prescribed formats, the candidates should adhere to those timeframes and formats. Also, the candidates should keep in mind what constitutes a logical argument versus a fallacy. And one of the most prevalent fallacies that I see being used in the US presidential debates is ad hominem, arguing against the person rather than the ideas that are being expressed. So good rational debate is much needed in American politics. But to see good rational debate, you're going to need to look at the debates among the alternative party candidates, because unfortunately, the Republicans and the Democrats have not risen to that caliber. And then, if you could repeat the last question for me.
What's your strategy to convince more voters?
Yes. So our strategy is to continue to put our message out there through our candidates, who are our ambassadors, Charlie Cam and Liz Parrish, as well as other representatives of the Transhumanist Party. We're happy to hold conversations like this one, to have interviews, to continue our activity on social media, to seek publications who will cover our work. And we're exploring some innovative options as well, for instance, through gamification of some of these ideas, or more creative posts on social media. And it's an evolving process. Certainly, as a technological party, we'd like to see what other ways we can use to harness emerging technologies to spread our message. And at the same time, we want to keep building up our internal infrastructure as a political organization, as an advocacy organization, so that when these technologies become more prominent, when more people become ready to hear our message, we will be there, and we will be there with the means to deliver that message and to get people to realize that a hopeful and constructive alternative for the future is possible. But we invite everybody all over the world to join us. Go to transhumanist-party.org/membership and sign up. Even if you live outside the United States, you can be an allied member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party and take part in our conversations, and perhaps represent some of these ideas in your country as well. Because one of the most effective ways of building this kind of awareness is through one-on-one discussions. So if you sit down with a person and you have a conversation, and you also try to find out where that person is coming from, what that person's views and values are, then you can identify what you have in common. And that serves as a basis for further collaboration, as well as further agreement, perhaps even in areas where you didn't think you would agree with that person. But if you take time to truly understand and craft an appeal to that individual, that's the most effective way. Of course, it's also the most time-consuming way, which is why I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. But if thousands of us agree to do it, and agree to spread similar messages based on the U.S. Transhumanist Party core ideals and platform, then we'll reach many more people. And if enough of them are convinced, then they can join us in this kind of grassroots, ever-spreading outreach approach. And that's how we might turn the whole world transhumanist, if we are particularly effective in that approach. But of course, that's a work of years and perhaps decades, but we have to start somewhere.
Thank you that how you collaborating with the other things. Even still there are questions, from audience, and I know you are very busy. So before your concluding remarks, I just want to add one thing. Let's say I want to come up with some of my personal experience. I'm actually from Bangladesh, and very small city of Bangladesh, like Rajbari. So when I start my debatings, I was really inspired by the debate of US presidential candidate. I can remember when I was young, I observed debate of Clinton's, and it's actually give me a lot of inspiration. And from that place, step by step, I do a lot of engage with the debating community. We become national champions. We go for international debating competitions, and we go for Oxford Union, Cambridge Unions, and all of the prestigious universities, and we do debate. Not only that, in 2013, Bangladesh was BRAC University 2013, they were World Debating Championships. So I believe that this kind of presidential debate actually add more values and inspire more people. But I due to respect everyone, but today's debate actually not motivate me a lot. I'm very sorry to say. I'm very sorry. Maybe if I'm wrong, I'm sorry about that. But how I observe today debates, I cannot find too much of valuable things. I find someone blaming someone, someone blaming someone's sons, someone trying to disrespecting someone's. The US presidential debate actually not too much of uh, I'm really sorry if I'm hurt someone, but I'm just giving my opinion, not too much of valuable. So, as Transhumanist Party is a very dynamic organizations, and from World Talent Economy Forums, any kind of debating initiative, as I learned little bit of from global community. So, hopefully in the future we will arrange some quality debate, what you are talking about today, and we will arrange something valuables, and by this way we can create some example for youth community, example for the global community. So thank you for your valuable time and everything. Still there is a questions. For time constraint I cannot take all of your questions, but I want your concluding remarks.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Sharif, for the opportunity to speak with you and your audience today. I think it's extremely important for everyone watching this to recognize that no matter what the barriers are in the political system where you reside, you as an individual can still make a difference based on how you conduct yourself. Because progress happens not because individuals give in to whatever system is predominant. Progress happens when individuals say, no, I want something better. I want a world that is reasonable and just, that treats human beings fairly, that gives people the opportunity for advancement. And in every political system in the world today, you can find instances where that's unfortunately not the case. And Sharif, I fully agree with you in your characterization of this presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Unfortunately, standards have fallen so far since the 1990s. I remember watching the debates between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole, and they would not have stooped to that kind of substanceless rhetoric that Biden and Trump use. But as individuals, we can still choose to act differently, and we can still choose to pursue our principles. And when we talk about politics, we should talk about policy. We should talk about how human life can be improved. And this is what the Transhumanist Party strives to do. As a small political party, unfortunately, we can't reform the entire political system. But through our example, we can be exceptions to the unfortunate tendencies that we see all around us. And I hope that your viewers will join us for subsequent virtual enlightenment salons, which we hold every Sunday, typically at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Sometimes the timing will be different, where you will see additional examples of that kind of discourse. And also, I would encourage everyone watching this to go forth and have your own conversations of this caliber. Remember that nobody else can substitute for the role of the individual in being a part of this solution, creating a better culture. Because culture really is the sum total of individual choices and individual activities. And I think we can be better than what we saw from Joe Biden. We can be better than what we saw from Donald Trump. And if enough people start thinking that way, then the caliber of the candidates will improve, and what people expect of politics will improve. Until then, we have to carry the torch and keep working hard at realizing our ideals.
Thank you, sir. It's really nice conversations, and actually World Talent Economy Forums with Asia Research and Development Institute, Al Noor Academy Sarhadia Barhat. We are working together. We are doing research and different kind of intellectual activities. Your support is very valuable for us, because for growing this World Talent Economy Forums, I know that Transhumanist Party, you are supporting a lot, and hopefully futures we will work together, and we will do a lot of good work together. Thank you for your support and everything.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Sharif.
Thank you, sir.